It's finally happened. Toxapex is no longer a good Pokemon in Generation 9. The reign of Toxapex, the king of stall, is finally over. Toxapex currently sits at a 4% usage rate in competitive singles Pokemon in Generation 9, which is down from around 12% in Generation 7 and 8. Toxapex has always been the crown defensive jewel of any team since its introduction in Generation 7. Its raw bulk lets it handle almost any threat. It can either go physically defensive or specially defensive, depending on how many EVs you put in each stat, and even most super effective moves can't knock it out. On top of that, it has one of the best defensive abilities in Regenerator. It can take on the most powerful attacks and then switch out and do it all again later. Even further, it has one of the best defensive move pools ever. It has Scald to spread burns, Knock Off to remove items, Recover to heal, Toxic and Toxic Spikes, and finally Haze to stop setup sweepers. The combination of the threat of Scald and the move Toxic was particularly deadly. Scald can burn Steel and Poison type Pokemon who would be immune to being poisoned. This is really bad for physically attacking Pokemon. At several points over the course of Generation 7 and Generation 8, people have called for a ban on Toxapex for being too restricting. Being able to shut down most attackers in one team slot was massive, and you had to use a limited amount of Pokemon that weren't scared of Scald burns or Toxic to actually beat it. Toxapex itself sees minor rises and falls over the course of a metagame depending on what Pokemon are popular. Toxapex's main weakness is that it can be passive and vulnerable to taunt. It can't do a lot of damage directly, and for all the good moves I've mentioned, it can only run 4 of them at a time. Substitute or taunt Pokemon make a good way to beat Toxapex. For example, Calm Mind, Taunt, Tapu Fini could beat Toxapex 1v1, at least until Tapu Fini weak teams started using Poison Jab Toxapex. While Toxapex does have its flaws, make no mistake, it is definitely the best defensive Pokemon, arguably of all time. When early trailers revealed some of the new Pokemon that would be in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and everyone was focusing on stuff like the new starter Pokemon, competitive singles players were focusing on the subtle release of Toxapex. Thankfully, there have been several key nerfs to Toxapex that make it not a great Pokemon overall. Number 1 is that Toxapex doesn't have Scald anymore. Scald has been removed from every Pokemon except Volcanion. It is now Volcanion's signature move. This has large implications for all Water-type Pokemon, but especially Toxapex. It's crazy to even think about a metagame with no Scald. It's been a key part of the game since Generation 5. Scald was a no drawback, high value move that was very consistently good, and its ability to spread burn acted as an effective deterrent for almost all physically attacking Pokemon. Without Scald, Toxapex isn't an effective stop to physical attackers. The mere threat of the Scald burn was huge. Now, Toxapex has to use the far inferior Chilling Water. Chilling Water is a new move introduced in Generation 9, presumably to replace Scald. And while it does lower attack, it doesn't have the long-term effects that a burn would have. Chilling Water is only a temporary solution because the opponent can always switch out and come back later. Number 2, Toxapex lost Knockoff. This may change in the future when Pokemon Home gets released. Pokemon Home is an app that would let you transfer Pokemon from an older game, and it's likely that Toxapex will get Knockoff back from Generation 8. But until then, Toxapex doesn't have another key attacking move, which is Knockoff. Knockoff is an incredibly high value move and is good versus every Pokemon. Toxapex is a do-nothing style of Pokemon where it sits there and stops attacking Pokemon. Knockoff was one of the ways to gain value after it stopped an attacker. After stopping an attacker, it could knock off an item like leftovers from an opponent switching in. Over the course of the game, it could knock off several key items on Pokemon. Along with Scald, Knockoff helped mitigate the flaw of being a sitting duck. Third is that the move Recover has had its PP nerfed in half to 8 now after using a PP max. Toxapex's main idea is that it can outstall anything. Through regen switching and Recover PP, Toxapex would be tough to brute force through. Not anymore. Coupled with the non-permanence of Chilling Water, attacking Pokemon often have enough PP to attack into Toxapex a couple times, waste Recover PP, maybe get hit by Chilling Water a few times, and then switch out and come back again later. With half the recover PP, it can converge into a situation where Toxapex runs out of recover PP before the attacker runs out of attacking PP. This isn't as big a nerf because Toxapex still does have Regenerator to heal HP, but it's definitely worth mentioning and its effect would be noticeable in longer games. The fourth reason is just overall power. Generally speaking, in every generation, Pokemon get stronger than the previous one. For one, it's because they have to create new Pokemon that are more exciting than the old one, and two, more Pokemon overall also means that there are more high-powered Pokemon overall to choose from, and the overall power level increases. Pokemon is not exceptional in that regard. That's something most game franchises deal with, and it leads to power creep as it's called. The main example are all these Paradox Pokemon who are pretty ridiculously strong. Iron Bundle has a terrifying Freeze Dry, Great Tusk has a strong Headlong Rush, and from a statistical point of view, there are now many Pokemon that has what it takes to take on the defensive behemoth of Toxapex. Number 5, which is the final main reason, is Terrestrialization. Pokemon can now Terrestrialize an existing stab move to try and smash their way through Toxapex. Or they can change their type to maneuver through Toxapex. As of right now, Toxapex isn't a big enough threat to Terrestrialize specifically for it, but it still feels the effect of the mechanic. Same Terra-type Pokemon can incidentally break through Toxapex even if they're not running it specifically for it. More power is always good and it's a pretty common idea. Similarly, Terra-type changes to beat Water are common because Water is a good, common type overall, and many Terra-type changes would hit Toxapex incidentally. On the other hand, Toxapex is not an extremely good Terrestrialization candidate. In a pinch, it can be used defensively to stop a specific attacker, but long term, you would lose access to a pretty good defensive typing in Water and Poison. There's also the opportunity cost of Terrestrializing defensively. It means that you yourself cannot Terrestrialize anymore with your own powerful attacking Pokemon. In Generation 9, it mainly tries to use a Chilling Water Haze defensive moveset. It can be used as a Toxic Spike spreader, although it does face competition from Glimmora in that role. Glimmora is a very popular hazard setter lately, and its ability Toxic Debris can set up Toxic Spikes without having to spend a turn to do it. Palafin's Taunt plus Bulk Up can actually win versus Toxapex 1v1 depending on the moveset. The fundamentals of what Toxapex tries to do hasn't changed, it's just that it's worse at doing it. Toxapex's inherent qualities means it can never be truly terrible, so mediocre or average is a better word to describe it, but it's certainly not great or meta-defining like it has been in the past. And that is the not so tragic fall of Toxapex in competitive singles Pokemon.